Hello and welcome to DBC's special program, Meet the Envoy. I'm Antara Rai Chaudhary with you. Dear viewers, on 25th August 2017, a huge number of Rohingyas fled from Rakhine State to Bangladesh for shelter, and a lot of organizations have been helping us to tackle the situation. IFRC is one of them, and today we have Mr. Alexander Matheou with us. He is the Regional Director of International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, IFRC, in the Asia-Pacific region. He has recently visited Bangladesh, and we are having an opportunity to talk to him about IFRC, Red Crescent, and the humanitarian situation of Bangladesh and around the world. Mr. Alexander Matheou, welcome to DBC News Studio.
Thank you for having me.
How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Okay, sir, to begin with, you can briefly tell our audience about IFRC.
Well, IFRC stands for the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. It's a network of 192 Red Cross and Red Crescent societies, which means almost every country in the world has one. They support their governments and their vulnerable communities to respond to disasters and other health crises. And together, it's the biggest humanitarian network in the world. And it follows certain principles of neutrality, impartiality, and independence to ensure that we put people in crisis first.
Great. So as we came to know that within this year, this is the second visit of you in Bangladesh. At this moment, what do you think that, how was the last visit, and what do you see the difference in these visits?
Well, I think the big contrast between two visits would be not my most recent one, but the one in early 2018 and this time. Because in 2018, I had the opportunity to see the people displaced from Myanmar in their very early stages. And in this visit, 5 years on, I saw the camps in a very different condition. So I think the contrast really is between those two visits, nearly 5 years, to see the early conditions of people when they arrived and the conditions that people live in now.
So you visited a couple of years ago in Cox's Bazar, and you are completely can see the difference that what was there and what was now. But recently, the UN envoy went to Cox's Bazar for a visit, and her concern was that United Nations are not getting enough fund for the Rohingya crisis. So would you like to tell us about this concern, and what is IFRC thinking about the future funds of Rohingya program?
It's not unusual that a crisis receives a lot of money in its early years when it's big news and there's a lot of global solidarity and empathy, and then it progressively goes down over time. And 5 years is a long time for the world to pay attention to a crisis. So we were expecting that over time interest would wane, and that is what's happening. However, I would say that there is a large number of, a consistent number of countries that admires what Bangladesh has done by allowing people to cross the border when they were extremely vulnerable and in need of protection. Not all countries do that. We watch the news. Some countries put up walls, some countries chase boats away, and only a few countries are generous enough to put people's protection first. And that is what we saw here. And so there's a lot of gratitude and respect around the world for that. And therefore there is still solidarity, even though crises such as that happening in Ukraine or Afghanistan are of course in the headlines and attracting more investment at the moment. But there is continued interest. But it is fair to say that the amount of money is going down, and that is going to present problems in terms of sustaining access to water, access to healthcare, access to shelter, all the critical services that people need in order to survive. So that is one of the challenges we're going to face from now on.
Great. This is a real concern for Bangladesh and the people of Bangladesh, because we have been working on this for a long time. However, Mr. Matheou, IFRC has been working for Bangladesh Red Crescent Society for several decades since 1971. So would you enlighten us that what else IFRC is doing for Bangladesh except for the Rohingya crisis?
Well, we are primarily the first responder, or we try to be the first responder to every natural and man-made disaster in the world. So whenever Bangladesh or any other country is hit by cyclones, floods, epidemics, pandemics, or large-scale population movement, we try to be at the front end of that response through a network of Bangladesh, in this case, Bangladesh Red Crescent volunteers, supported by the Bangladesh Red Crescent headquarters and branches. So responding to cyclones, flooding has been a major action of the IFRC since 1971. We've responded to all of them. We responded this year. Clearly they've varied in scale, but we always respond, small, medium or large. And we have been part of the journey of Bangladesh in trying to make communities safer and more resilient by building in early warning, shelters, which has seen a critical difference in terms of mortality rates from cyclones and flooding in the past and in the present day.
So at this current state, how is IFRC collaborating and cooperating with the government of Bangladesh?
Well, we work with various ministries on the response to the pandemic. We were actively involved in supporting the Bangladesh Red Crescent and the government of Bangladesh, at first to provide information to everybody on how to stay safe, then in providing materials, masks and other hygiene and sanitation materials. Then, once the vaccines became available, the Bangladesh Red Crescent, supported by the IFRC, was critical in both advising people to take the vaccine, but also supporting the logistics of it, and by delivering oxygen for the people who were most vulnerable. And just yesterday, we provided an oxygen plant to a hospital here in Dhaka as part of an ongoing preparedness and response to the pandemic. So we work with various ministries, and the ministries responding to disasters. We work on preparedness and response. And on the response to population movement, we also continue to support and advise on how best to manage the populations in Cox's Bazar.
What about the situation that happened in Sylhet, in the flood situation in Sylhet? How did IFRC help them doing that?
We have responded with food and non-food items and shelter. We didn't get as much support as we would have liked. So the volunteers did respond. We had pre-positioned stocks in Bangladesh which we could release. And we have raised some international financing. But sadly, because these disasters are more and more frequent, and because big crises such as the pandemic and such as the war in Ukraine and world attention elsewhere, even when something relatively major happens like this, it tends to generate less international support. And in some ways, Bangladesh is a victim of its own success because it manages these floods far better than in the past, and therefore few people lose their lives, thankfully. It tends not to really hit the global headlines, which means it doesn't generate the same level of global solidarity as crises in the past. But nevertheless, through our own financing mechanisms and appeals, we continue to provide support.
Would you like to mention that at this moment, how much people are working for IFRC, like the number of volunteers they're working for Bangladesh?
Well, for around the world, we have 13 million volunteers. It is a huge organization if you count every single country in the world that has volunteers and raises money both nationally and internationally. That money is never in one place. It's not a pot of money that is in one country that is distributed. It is distributed around the world and managed nationally. But it has some capacity to mobilize international financing and then to channel it to where it's most needed. So it's 13 million nationally, and the numbers vary from country to country.
Great. So I would like to go for the next question now. We know that recently Bangladesh Red Crescent Society got re-elected as one of the governing board members of IFRC along with 192 countries. So in the worldwide member of Red Crescent and Red Cross and Red Crescent societies. So what is Red Crescent Bangladesh role in it at this moment?
Well, now it is going to be one of 25 countries that governs the biggest humanitarian network in the world. And it will have to make sure that we manage our resources well, that we manage them honestly and with integrity, that we maintain the right standards and quality assurance all around the world, that our brand is protected by that quality assurance, that each of the Red Cross and Red Crescent societies performs to a certain standard, that ensures that that brand can always be a sign of hope to people in crisis. We're very happy to have Bangladesh on the board. It was a fair election. They won compared to other countries who were competing against them, which is a demonstration of the world's trust in this organization. For the many things that it's done, for the crises over the years, and more recently for its critical role in climate disaster response, which we expect Bangladesh, sadly, it will be at the forefront of climate disasters, and the Bangladesh Red Crescent will be a critical responder there. It did very well in the pandemic and earned global respect for that. And for hosting people displaced from Myanmar. It manages the biggest refugee crisis in Asia Pacific, and there's a lot to contribute and a lot to admire and a lot to learn from that.
That's really great. And since you have visited other countries' national society, so did you find any mentionable activity that are being done in Bangladesh's national society?
Well, I've led humanitarian responses in many different parts of the world. Recently in Ukraine, I've been very involved in Afghanistan over the last year, and I've been involved in working with donor capitals as well. So in those donor capitals, Bangladesh is an important context for the reasons that I said: front line of the climate response, a world leader in disaster preparedness and disaster resilience, and hosting a major displacement crisis which continues to be with us, as we said earlier. For those reasons, it continues to be referred to both as a case from which we can learn, a success case, but a case of ongoing concern because the climate disasters, I'm afraid, will be with us inevitably in the years ahead of us, and we need to be ready for them, and Bangladesh is the front line of that.
We would like to know more about this, but we will just take a short break at this moment. So viewers, we are taking a short break, and we will have more important and interesting conversation with our respected guest, Mr. Alexander Matheou, soon after the break. Stay with us. So he's the Regional Director of International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Society. So we would go back to the conversation we were having before the break. So Mr. Alexander, now we would like to know that what are the key areas on which IFRC will emphasize in the coming days?
Well, I'd like to say a few words more about the population movement from Myanmar into Bangladesh, because at the 5th year anniversary, it's very much on our mind. And we have seen over those 5 years that the quality of services that have been provided here are really improved. So comparing it compared to when I first saw it, where there was not yet access to water, not yet access to medical care, the infrastructure was very poor, there are dramatic improvements. So we have a challenge, number one, to sustain it and to sustain donor interest. But what worries us more about Cox's Bazar and Bhasan Char is what you don't see. It's what's happening to people's lives if they are without work, without access to education, with nothing much to do all day. So at first, when people first arrived, survival was the most important thing. They were traumatized. But after 3 or 4 years, as people begin to settle and feel safer, our psychological well-being becomes equally important. So I think, as the whole transition is managed in terms of we don't know how long people will stay and when they will be able to go back. Humanitarian organizations, together with the government of Bangladesh, do need to be thinking about a few things. One is just people's well-being psychologically as well as physically, about distributing support not just in the camps themselves but to host communities who have been very much affected by this, but also to think about other crises that are going on in the country which are equally worthy of effort and support. And of those, the one that comes to mind most is the climate threat. And if I were to say that what is the biggest crisis that we are thinking about in the IFRC that will affect all of us and fundamentally change our lives, it is the climate threat. Whether that's increasing heat or increasing rain, the climate is changing and we're all witnessing it. And there are some people who will be on the front line of that. People who live in large cities which create these heat bubbles that become unbearable to live in if there's no rain. Farmers who are affected by drought, or people who are living in lowland areas who will be affected by flooding. We have a big effort to try to prepare those frontline communities to manage those crises and those changes as well as we possibly can. Now we, in the grand scheme of things, are small because the big solutions are beyond us, the changes in how we use energy, the changes in our lifestyles, the changes in how we use transport. But there are things we can do to help. We can help communities know what the risk is. We can help them know how better to prepare, how to keep themselves safe, and we can provide the frontline support for those who are most affected if they do have to leave their homes and if their lives are at risk. So we are starting to prepare for more and more of this. And Bangladesh, because of its physical location is going to be at the front line of that and will be a key partner for us in the years to come.
So last time you have visited Bhasanchar, so would you like to tell us that what were your insights when you visited that place?
Well, I was grateful to get the chance because people talk a lot about Bhasanchar. Some say it's going to be a great and safe place for people to live, and others have a lot of reservations about the potential isolation that people will experience. Everyone has an opinion, but very few people have actually gone to have a look. So I was glad to be one of the few that had a chance to actually visit, speak to the authorities and speak to the people who live there. I would say that the positives are that clearly it is a better environment in which to live with dignity. The housing is better, the facilities are better, the space is better, and there's more potential for recreation and for livelihoods, which is critical for dignity. So that is all on the positive side. On the side where there is reservation, at the time I was there, and I will say that many of these things have been addressed. At the time I was there, people were afraid that once they'd arrived, they would never see their family again or could never visit them again. That if they fell seriously ill, they would not be able to be referred to somewhere that was capable of giving more thorough treatment. That the livelihoods and recreational activities hadn't really started yet, and that teachers and medical staff may not want to go there, and therefore they wouldn't get the services that they had been promised. All of these things were on people's minds in the early days that I visited. More people have arrived since. I would say credit where credit's due. Many of these things have been addressed and are being addressed. So when I came back, I met representatives of the government and talked about what I'd seen, and there is action on it. So people are now visiting families, they're in contact with them. A referral system for more serious medical cases is up and running. More effort has gone into the recreational and livelihoods opportunities, many of which are now up and running. So I hope it is going to be a place where people feel safer, where they can live with dignity until they have options to return. But we'll have to see how many people choose to go. The critical thing that we've always said, and the government of Bangladesh has respected and honoured this, is that it must be choice, that people must choose to go there. And that also means they could also choose to leave and go back to Cox's Bazar if they preferred. That was always the biggest concern, that it would be a one-way trip, and that it wasn't necessarily a one-way trip that people would want to make. But all evidence is that people are choosing, and therefore if they continue to make that choice, then the IFRC and the Bangladesh Red Crescent will be part of the journey to try and make the place as livable and as safe as possible for the people who are there.
However, we are at the end of our program. So, sir, would you like to share some last few words for the viewers and about what you like most about Bangladesh nature, culture and media?
Well, thank you for that question. I have to go back saying first, because of why I'm here, because of the 5 years, just a big thank you to the people of Bangladesh, to the government of Bangladesh, for being decent enough to recognize that a lot of people were afraid in crisis, and you provided a safe haven for them. That was a great gesture, not just to the people themselves, but to the world, and it has earned respect and gratitude from many, many people, including all of us in the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Everything that's been learnt here about setting up good early warning systems, moving into safe places, releasing financing early, getting people prepared to keep their livelihoods safe, just the inner resilience and the courage to face it and then move on. That's a lesson for the world, which, sadly we're all going to have to learn, but we are looking at Bangladesh to learn from it. But then thirdly, on a more personal level, it's always a hospitable place to visit. There's always a warm welcome. There's a curiosity, a confidence together with a humility, confidence in what's been achieved, but a humility to learn, which makes it a rewarding place to visit and a rewarding place to work.
Thank you so much. So it's a heartfelt gratitude from us that you are over here sharing us with all the ideas and the conversations we had about IFRC and Bangladesh's work. So we were at the end of our program, so I would like to say a goodbye for now. We hope to meet again. Thank you, viewers, for watching Meet the Envoy.